For many people in America, the struggles over the past year in Ukraine are mainly a distant political conflict, but the combination of warfare, displacement, and government propaganda have also resulted in personal traumas. Our guest is trying to provide relief through a program known as Wounded Warrior Ukraine. We'd like to welcome the founder of the campaign, Roman Targovitsky. Thank you very much for being with us, Roman.
Thank you for having me.
I know you've been an activist, almost an agitator around these issues, but you're also trying to provide a kind of a service, and you've been to Ukraine recently. What did you see there?
Yeah, I just came back from Kyiv, and we brought our first training organized through Wounded Warrior Ukraine. This is a training that prepares soldiers to become trainers that have education to prevent and treat post-traumatic stress disorder.
Now, you would think this is something that people in almost any country sending soldiers off to war would be doing, but I guess in Ukraine it's not that easy.
Actually, you would be surprised, because my understanding that even in US there is a great deal of preparation for the soldiers in terms of military training, and some of that as a side effect is helpful to prevent PTSD, but there is not much of intentional training, basically, first of all, telling soldiers what is going to happen to them, how their body and psyche is going to react to the shock trauma they may experience during the combat, and then what are the consequences and how to deal with them, what is normal, what is abnormal. And that's why also in US we have now an epidemic of PTSD and the resulting suicides and many psychological problems.
So what's the main shortfall that you're trying to help with there? Is it simply that they don't have the resources, or they don't have the know-how, equipment? So what are we talking about?
So in general, we created the organization in order to provide and establish modern rehab services in Ukraine, and that rehab both in terms of psychological rehab as well as physical rehab medicine. But this project in particular, it is about treatment and prevention of PTSD, and that unique training that we brought, that training was actually created in Denmark for the Danish soldiers who went through Afghanistan war. And the problem that it solves is that when soldiers come back from the combat, they are not likely to talk to psychologists, because they have absolutely different life experiences. The psychologists tend to be sitting in comfortable offices, while the soldiers were actually experiencing very shocking events, including their life being in danger and killing people. And therefore, there is not much in common between these two people. So that training created by Bodynamic and Dieter Marcher, our trainer, the idea was to provide the knowledge on how to treat and prevent post-traumatic stress disorder by educating the people, the soldiers, who actually already went through the trauma. And so that's the key point. It's much easier for the soldier to talk to the soldier.
By the way, did you talk to any of these soldiers who come back from conflict?
Danish soldiers?
Well, even people who were there in Ukraine.
Yeah, I interviewed after the training some of the soldiers, some of the Ukrainian soldiers.
I guess the other thing that must be particularly disturbing is that, as bad as it would be to be sent off to another country, and there were Russian soldiers sent off to Afghanistan who came back in rough shape too, but, Ukrainians and Russians, there's so much close connections. They have family ties, geographic ties. This must be pretty rough on people.
It is very rough, and there is a lot of aggression that people accumulate, because oftentimes they have relatives who are calling them from Russia, and they're telling them, how can you live in Ukraine when your government is fascist? And the Ukrainians are saying, well, we don't have any fascists around here. But many Russians are so indoctrinated by the TV and Putin propaganda that they earnestly believe that there are actually fascists and Nazis in Ukraine. And one of the major points in releasing the trauma from the psyche and the body is ultimately making peace with your enemy. So that even if you have to fight with the enemy, it's about also making, on some level, peace. And that's also some of the programs that we are considering in the future of potentially working with the Russian soldiers. And there is a huge difference between Russian soldiers and Russian politicians. Most of the Russian politicians I would kill with my own hands. But the soldiers are very different, especially the soldiers who were injured in the conflict. And they will also need to deal with their psychological trauma.
What about how this is for the families? I know in Russia there's the controversy over alleged Russian volunteers who are being basically buried with almost undercover ceremonies, and parents are being told to shut up about it. What about the families in Ukraine?
Families?
Yes, how they're being treated, the families of soldiers. I mean, obviously the government's not trying to hide something, but they must be in rough shape, though.
Yes, but one of the amazing things that happened in Ukraine within past year and a half is that year and a half ago, Ukrainians basically didn't know what volunteer was. So when I was mentioning a word volunteer, people would be really weirded out because it was not in the post-Soviet concept of the mind of the universe that you would actually give your time for free without compensation. Right now, the entire, you can always say, entire Ukrainian society is being held together by a network of volunteer organizations. And many of these volunteers, they're actually full-time. They're spending their entire 40, 50, 60 hours per week on providing care. And some of these volunteer organizations are actually focused on helping families of the injured soldiers and families of those who were killed. And one of the aims of our organization is to actually provide resources also to these organizations to assist them to getting enough knowledge of how actually to work with victims of war, with the families whose close loved ones were killed.
Going back more than a year ago, when you saw those large crowds camping out in Kiev on the Maidan to change the government, a lot of volunteerism there. Did that tell you something about the power of this to transform society? Because you don't want to just have another bunch of corrupt politicians doing the same thing all over again. So what about that power?
I think that was one of the most amazing experiences in history, at least in my life, because when I came to Maidan, and I came to Maidan by accident, and I was very fortunate to observe how dramatically the entire society consisting of individuals changed almost overnight, because people became kinder after a certain horrible event, after the government beat up the students in the most violent way and crushed their bones. But people came together and they managed to get together and collectively overcome their own individual fear. And by changing collectively, they also changed inside. And that was one of the most inspiring things for me, because I have never seen anything of the sort before. And I'm not sure if I will observe anything. It's interesting that the Western media did not really manage to capture that on a wider scale, because a lot of the media focused on burning tires, on the images that were attractive to the American audience, or on interviews with politicians. But the most precious, what I observed on Maidan Uprising, were actually people who changed, who became better.
We should mention a couple of things here. Your needs for the trauma relief program. What exactly are you aiming for?
So there is a very interesting connection between the issues that we have in U.S. and in Ukraine. Trauma, you can say, is almost at the core of many of the social issues in America, because, for example, many people who commit crimes, some studies show that over 90% of them had early childhood very serious trauma. So this issue of trauma is really, we're not talking about it enough, and we're not doing enough in our prison system to deal with trauma and to resolve our social issues at the core of it. And therefore, the opportunity that we have in Ukraine, very amazing, innovative opportunity, is to create a new system of rehab, both physical and psychological, that addresses trauma and traumatization from the scratch, because Ukrainians are open to it. There is space for that. There is space for innovation. It's always easier to create something from the scratch by attracting experts in their own fields rather than changing the society. And then we can translate that model back into US.
So first of all, if anybody wants to help out with that in some way, you've got something online that they can
Yes, so we have a website. It's woundedwarriorukraine.org, and we're in particular interested in Americans and Canadians who have been working in rehab, medical doctors, physical therapists. So if you're interested, please email. And also, there will be a concert this Sunday at 7 p.m. at Middle East Club in support of this project by a very well-known Ukrainian singer. So if you'd like to support us and have some fun in the evening, then please do come.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Roman Targavitsky for Wounded Warrior Ukraine. We'll have more news in just a moment.